what really is the test of our ability to love is to see those challenges through and to do the work when it's not easy. Like you were talking about your experience with your friend and the love that you have for him. And because you love him so much, you're going to do the work, right? Like upon reflection. Of course, we have experiences in the heat of the moment where it can be, like you said, compelling to just be like, fuck that guy. But then when we sit and we reflect and we get out of, that kind of like fight or flight mode, we can come back to our senses and be more rational and be like, no, but I actually really care about this person and I'm going to put in the work to make it work.
Maharishi says that all love is directed by the self, for the self, to the self. What do you think he meant by that? And also, do you think that's true? Even better, I'm going to share it with you.
All right.
A trip down memory lane, because I haven't watched a Maharishi.
So all currents of love are directed by the self, for the self, to the self. Everything else is a wrong evaluation.
You think that's just gobbledygook, or I'm asking myself the same question. I'm like,
what comes to mind for me when I hear that quote is the notion that I think some people have, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but you know how some people say, especially in more spiritual circles, that we are love. And that's our true nature and our essence. Like what we're made of is love. I don't know if that's true, but I think that that's what could be seen as cyclical, and that we're experiencing what we put out, we experience within. And it's like a cycle. But
I can't believe I opened with a Maharishi quote.
It was actually, that is a trip down memory lane for me. I don't frequent his writings or his videos, but of course I went to MIU and...
Well, that's how I met you, was at MIU. We were freshmen in college. I bring it up because obviously you have a background doing your Love Summit, which I want to hear more about today, but it feels like you have this deep commitment in helping others. It comes across as like really genuine, like you're really doing something, sharing a message to uplift and help people grow.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I've always had this kind of, I guess, deep conviction for what I now realize is love and the principles of love. Even when I was a little kid, I remember having a very strong sense of what I felt was just and right and not just and not right. And to give an example, I would get very upset when I saw a kid in school being mistreated or left out. I think back then it was more so, I guess, the conviction for kindness and being kind to others and treating others well. And that's just stuck with me throughout my life and later on became actually my work as I left college and then actually worked in the fashion industry for a little bit, became very disenchanted with that rather quickly. And then...
What were you doing in the fashion industry?
I was an intern at an eco-fashion company that did events at Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week and other runway shows and fashion shows. We did pop-ups and we were always exhibiting eco-friendly fashion designers. And yeah, I did that for a while and it was cool in its own way, but I also, it did not fill me in the way that I was looking to be filled. I was also pursuing modeling at the time and that was very difficult and I came to realize wasn't healthy for me. So I took a break from that and that's when I found this nonprofit called Dream Change that I started working at. And there I started this business and leadership conference called the Love Summit. And I stayed at that nonprofit for 5 years, and I did 2 Love Summits under that nonprofit. And that was where really I started digging into love as a concept that could be applied to business and business ethics. And the whole idea was that like love is seen as taboo usually in business and in government. And I think that that's because of the misinterpretations we have about love in society, because of the way that we're brought up to think about love, that love is just this soft concept. And it's really what I've learned through my research is that it's quite different than that. Yes, love is kind and love is thoughtful and respectful, but it also takes a lot of work to employ those principles of love, because I mean, we're all human. We know that we get it's easy to get angry or upset and react. It can be hard to hold ourselves and others responsible and accountable for our actions. But I believe that when we really do that, that is a practice of love. And I'm still working on this in some ways to bring that to the business world. And
I queued up this clip. I'm going to share it with you, but it's you talking about the Love Summit a couple of years ago.
Aww.
Can I put it up? It's super cool.
Yes.
Love Summit is the first business conference designed to demonstrate how business practices and compassion leadership can help solve some of our most pressing social issues. Joining me this morning is founder Samantha Thomas. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you and I were talking during the break, and I said when I first read the title, when I was looking over my notes, it said Love Summit. And I thought, oh, a relationship, for married couples. But no, this is something totally different. Still a relationship process, yes, but on a different level, a business level. Why did you found this?
I created the Love Summit a few years ago and came up with the concept because I was going to a lot of business conferences, and a lot of conferences centered around the idea of sustainable living, and I was realizing that they were missing the underlying point and key to creating a more evolved, sustainable world, and that is that if we don't change the way we relate to each other and the planet, it doesn't matter how many solar panels we use, how many wind turbines we use, we could end up going to war with solar-powered bombs. So it's really important that we start by developing positive relationships with each other in our businesses, in our workplace, where we spend so much of our lives every day.
Wow, I haven't seen that in so long.
Wait, so that was out of Cincinnati?
Yeah, so that was the second Love Summit. I was interviewed on a news station there right before the second Love Summit. So yeah, I haven't seen that in ages. Thanks for the reminder.
I mean, it's awesome, and you're coming through it looks incredibly professional. I'm curious too, because all the headlines were coming out with Dan Price takes this massive pay cut. He bumped everyone's pay salaries up to $70K or something. But you got to work with him a little bit, right? He was a guest speaker at this conference.
Yeah, the first Love Summit took place in 2015, and that was right when Dan had made that announcement that he was going to cut his salary to 70. Well, actually, sorry, I don't know what he cut it to, but he was cutting his salary to give all of his employees a $70,000 salary. That just struck me as really fascinating, and it happened right before the first Love Summit, as I said. And so I was really interested in what inspired him to do that, and I asked him to come speak at the Love Summit about what that experience was like for him and what was the impetus for that move. And so he did speak at the first Love Summit, and he gave a really good talk and really good reasoning behind why he did what he did, and it was quite moving.
We came out of a pandemic, and in some ways it feels like we're still in it. And now we're just going through these like crazy rate hikes and supply chain issues. And where does love fit into all of that? Has it changed for you over the years? Like your maybe application of it in the business world, is it more or less the same nowadays, or has it evolved?
Well, I've been in an interesting place related to love over the last year and a half or so, because a couple of years ago was in London doing a graduate program and getting a Master's of Science in Global Prosperity and doing research on love as a social ethic and what that looks like. And the idea was that I was going to do that program and then graduate and then either do another Love Summit or go on to do my PhD if I felt that I wanted to do more research. COVID hit about 3/4 of the way through the program. And so instead of going back to London or staying in London to do my PhD, I decided to come back to the States and to finish my dissertation here and not do my PhD and put that off for now. I was just looking to have more stability in my life, and I'd lived in a lot of different places, and I was looking for a place that I could call home for myself, and found myself in Nashville during that time. Ended up finding a job here working as marketing director for a lighting company. I'm primarily focused on that and mostly on bringing love into my own workplace as an ethic and showing up in a way at work as much as I can with the principles of love and embedding that into our values as a company, which has been really rewarding. At the same time, that's come at a cost in terms of, like I said, not having as much time to focus on what's happening politically in the world and just being consumed by the day-to-day, which I think that so many people are, the average person is, which is why I think the political climate now and throughout history is often not ideal because most of us don't have the time that's necessary to be as active as we need to be in politics and governance to really create the change that's needed. So as far as how I believe love might apply to the current political climate and economic climate and what's happening with supply chain and supply shortages and inflation, I think it's really hard to say, but I think that it comes down to a pretty basic kind of concept, and that is that this overarching issue of greed and the idea that if I don't take enough for me and myself and my family, I'm not going to be okay. And so I think as long as we don't think of the whole world and every person in the world as our family, and we have the mindset of just thinking of ourselves, which is the complete opposite of love. Love is actually my favorite quote about love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's growth. Love is as love does. It's an act of will, an intention, and an action. So will implies choice. We don't have to love, we choose to love. And as long as we're not choosing to extend ourselves for others and we're only doing that for ourselves, it's going to create this dissonance. It's going to create this imbalance, right? And I think that that's what we're seeing in the world today, right now, and that's what we've seen throughout history. And as long as that idea and that value persists, we're never going to have balance and harmony.
I like what you said there, and honestly, to like circle back on that Maharishi quote, it's kind of a bummer to me, like personally, because I feel like he's getting at something that's like really kind of mechanically self-serving. And I want to think that love kind of transcends that in some ways, that it wouldn't just be like, oh, I do a nicety to someone else. It's really just for me. Yeah. What was that quote that you just said? Who was that by?
Yeah, it's by M. Scott Peck. He wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled. What you were saying, Luke, about Maharishi's quote, how that could seem maybe perhaps more self-serving, especially if kind of taken without any knowledge or understanding of love and what it really means. I could totally understand how someone might interpret it that way, but I think that what he's saying is that this actually comes back to, I think, a lot of the concepts around self-love. You know how people say, which I'll preface this by saying I do have issues around this sentiment too, because I think that it can be misconstrued as well. But you know how people say that we can only love others as much as we love ourselves?
I love that. That's so true. I feel like it's true.
Yeah. I feel like there's definitely truth to that, and I think that that's probably what Maharishi was alluding to in his quote about love being directed by the self, to the self, for the self. Because when we direct it by ourselves in a really pure, beautiful way, to ourselves in a really beautiful way, and for ourselves, then we can do that for others. At the same time, my issues with the self-love movement or concept is that I think it's often misconstrued in the sense that people think that, or can be made to feel that they have to cultivate self-love on their own without the help of others. And I feel that there couldn't be anything farther from the truth. Actually, Bell Hooks, the woman who I based my master's dissertation research on, she has this concept of the love ethic, and she talks about the different principles of love. Actually, I'll pull up some of them. They're principles like commitment, care, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And I love her principles because they're kind of different, I think, some of them, to what we would typically think the principles of love are. But getting back to the self-love concept, she talks a lot about how self-love can, and love for the self can only really be cultivated when we're supported by a nurturing environment and by people who love and care for us. And not to mention, we also need, as human beings in a very practical world and physical world, we need resources that support us, economic, physical resources that support us in being able to live a good life. And even though a good life is quite simple, and our needs are quite simple, we obviously live in a world where there's always, there's a lot of inequality that leads to conditions that people live in that are not healthy and not conducive to their growth.
Maybe the breakdown of love, I don't know, maybe the golden rule or something, but just that greed can like creep in. And there's this famous quote in Wall Street where Gordon Gekko is giving a talk to all the shareholders, and he's like, greed is good, blah, blah, blah. It was so well written, but in such a compelling and dark way, that it kind of inspired a whole movement of people to be like, yeah, that's what I want. I want to get into Wall Street and be like, greed is good.
It reminds me of a reference that John Perkins used to make often. So I used to work with John Perkins, the author, who is the founder of the nonprofit that I directed. And then I also worked as his publicist for a couple of years. And I actually want to look this up because I don't want to miss.
Because, he wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah, he did. He wrote that, and he has several other books. But I think that Confessions of an Economic Hitman and the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, those are his bestsellers, his New York Times bestsellers. But he would, gosh, it's been so long since I've kind of gone back to John and his message. We're still friends and he's like family to me, but I haven't heard him speak in a long time publicly. But in his talks, he would often quote Milton Friedman, the economist, and he would talk about how the responsibility of business is to increase profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. Now, I don't actually know if Milton Friedman said that verbatim or if that's an accurate quote, but I know that John would often reference that, and his point was that we as a society have adopted that mindset over the years, and that's what's created so much of the destruction that's happened in the world, especially environmentally, but also socially. And I think it speaks to what you were just talking about, Luke, that quote by the guy from Wall Street and that concept on Wall Street. And in some ways, we are moving away from that mindset. I think one of the upsides to the internet and being able to communicate in the way that we can today, of course, there are downsides to it too, but one of the upsides is that there's more access to information. Could be some downsides to that too. But access to just like sharing knowledge and to understanding and I think that there are a lot of positive movements happening that are trying to change that mindset of increasing profits of business at the cost of society's well-being and the environment's well-being. And I know there's certainly a lot of organizations, nonprofits, and communities that are working towards changing that, but it seems like there's still obviously a lot of resistance and a lot of attachment to the way that things are, and have been, and people are, I think, afraid to try something new. You know, we humans don't like to change unless we're forced to, usually.
That's so true. I had this really interesting experience actually with an old childhood friend, and I feel like it's relevant because we ended up getting into this like terrible argument. You know, it was like a really hot day, and their story, their side of things was so compelling to them, right? They were like 100% right. And I also felt very right and justified in the situation, but there was this terrible disagreement, right? Kind of ended on a bad note. And it took like several weeks to kind of repair it. It got discouraging there for a minute because I was like, two people who like love and care about each other, a friendship that's lasted forever, and seemingly something trivial. It was kind of amazing like what it took to finally like come full circle on that, because it was super compelling to just be like, you know what, fuck this guy. I'm better off alone. Like I'm better off just kind of going off doing my own thing. And then in like a quiet moment of reflection, I was like, I don't know if I want to be like that right about the situation. You know, I don't want to like, it's not worth it. Generally speaking, I feel like the tools that we have today for conflict resolution, good, clear communication, and ultimately circling back on love, and it's like all the principles that, you know, would cultivate a relationship, it feels missing. I didn't get any of this education in school. I luckily stumbled over some books and some this and some that, but friends or business or coworkers, and like conflict resolution, like how do you come full circle, like, to you?
Well,
it's a loaded question, but
no, they're great questions, and yeah, a lot of questions, but great questions, and welcome to the club. I think we've all had an experience like that at one point or another, and have felt at a loss for what to do, or felt like there aren't enough resources out there to understand how to navigate such situations. And that's why I'm interested in speaking more publicly about love, to bring more light to the idea of love and how we can use it as a tool to navigate these situations. And one of the keys to, I think, resolving conflict and to the issue, for example, that you underlined, is there has to be a willingness from both parties, from both sides, to resolve the conflict, number one. And that willingness often begins with the willingness to, I think, see things more innocently, to not have the need to be right. What you said reminds me of the question, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And how much does being right actually matter? And sometimes it takes one person taking that step and being like, okay, I don't need to be right, so like, let's just, and not that you even need to say that, but you know, you could just kind of like back away, be a little bit more silent, whatever. But of course, it's ideal and really beautiful if both people are like, I respect you, your opinion, you respect me and my opinion. That's great. And what really matters at the end of the day, what really matters is this awesome friendship that we have that goes so far beyond and so much deeper than these surface level issues that are really trivial. And that's what we're arguing about right now. Like, what really matters in a friendship and a relationship? It matters that people feel seen. It matters that people feel heard and loved, and that you have a good time when you're together and you bring joy to each other and each other's lives. And so, of course, it can be really amazing if both people can come to the table with that mindset, but often that's not the case. And so sometimes you might need to be the pioneer and the leader of that in your relationship. And by kind of leading the way and showing the way for your friend or your coworkers, that will inspire them to take the step. I think there are some good conflict resolution resources out there for businesses. I know that at Valet, the lighting company that I work at, we use The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that book by, I think it's Patrick Lencioni, if I remember the name correctly. But there are certainly not very many resources related to love and conflict. And I would love to be able to produce something like that for people one day, but probably got a ways to go before that will come out.
You did mention for a while there you had at least started writing a book. Is it something you feel like talking about at all, or?
I mean, I love talking about writing. I started writing a book right after I finished my master's dissertation. I was really inspired by a lot of the research that I uncovered, and I was also inspired by some events in my own life that had taken place that were related to relationships and romance. And I was like, wow, this would make a great story for a book. Let's see if I can tie the two together. And I've experienced a lot of things in my own life personally since I was a child that have, I think, led me to this place of having such a conviction for love and such an interest in it, is like related to deficits of love in my own life. Like one example is with my biological father, who I don't have a relationship with, other dysfunctional family dynamics, things like that. So I kind of wanted to incorporate that all into one book, and then also have kind of a business section in it that would guide people in business about on the principles of love and how to incorporate them into their companies. And so it was like a big idea and concept that I had. I started a year and a half ago, and I wrote a couple hundred pages actually, but then a lot of the things that I had been writing about in that book related to the personal kind of love story thing, and it changed a lot and took a turn that I didn't expect and just really threw me off. And then simultaneously I had other personal kind of relationship things come up that were very difficult, and so I just decided to put it aside for a bit, and now I'm in a place where I'm finally thinking that I want to pick back up with it. I actually went on a writer's retreat a few weekends ago where I drove up to Asheville, North Carolina, and just spent the weekend revisiting what I had started. It's a lot emotionally. I think as an artist and a writer, anyone who's an artist, it's such an interesting process. It's like finding the balance between doing these things when inspiration hits, but also realizing that sometimes we can't wait for the inspiration to hit. You just have to start somewhere. And so that's what I've been working on recently. And as I was telling you before we hopped on the podcast, like really grateful that you reached out and asked me to do this podcast, because it's been a while since I've stepped back into this ring. And but I have had that intention over the last few weeks. And the hope with the book is that, I have no plan and will not make any promises for when it will come out, because I have no idea. It could be in a year, it could be in 5 years, but it's something that I'm working towards. And like you mentioned earlier, I do feel this like responsibility and inspiration to help people and to contribute to making the world a better place, because that's what makes life feel meaningful to me. So
yeah, I feel like those things have a tendency to come out at the perfect time. And it was just terrific getting you on the podcast, or when we did, because I know for a number of months we had discussed it, but I'm just coming off of like a couple of month hiatus, and I always find that when I come back, it's a little different. It's kind of renewed in ways that I didn't anticipate.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about just being in our lives and the experience of just being rather than doing all of the time.
What's your writing process like?
That's funny. Really putting me on the spot here. I don't really have a process. I just started writing. I didn't even have an outline for the book. I didn't have the chapters outlined. I was just so inspired by some events that had taken place in my life that it was just like all flowing onto the page so beautifully and easily. And I was telling a story, and I know that story, or I knew that story. It was so close to home and fresh in my memory at that time that I just wanted to write and get it down on paper, and then after that, go back and cut away. I remember John Perkins always telling me, because he mentored me a bit in my writing, that I forget the exact number he used, but he's like, for every 25 pages, you might use one of them or something like that. And so I kind of just use that as inspiration. Like, I have a tendency to be a perfectionist, huge perfectionist. And so if I allowed myself to be like, okay, here's page 1. Is it perfect? Can I move on to page 2? I would never move on to page 2. So I just wanted to write and get it all out and then go back and cut away. And I think that also goes back to the concept of what you were just talking about like being in our lives and just doing things and then going back and being refreshed. It's like, same thing applies to writing. Sometimes we write something and then if we take a break, we just get it all down and we take a break from it and then we go back. It's so much easier to see and so much clearer what needs to be cut away and what we need to do. So that was the approach that I took then. Now I'm actually looking at being more structured in the writing process because I'm realizing that for myself, that's really important to have structure and organization. And so I'm actually finding inspiration from a couple different areas. There's a book that I am listening to on Audible right now called How to Tell a Story, The Essential Guide to Memorable Storytelling from the Moth. So some of your listeners might be familiar with the Moth. It's this storytelling group that started in New York City back in, it may have been like the 80s or early 90s, and it's grown into this big thing. And there are really great tips and tools that they provide in that book about how to tell a story. And so I'm trying to use that now. And then I'm also working on getting involved in some writing groups here in Nashville. And there's this place called The Porch that offers a lot of writing workshops and events, which I'm planning on digging into over the next year or so.
That's so cool. Honestly, I want to be like one of the first people to grab that off the shelf when you actually do finish writing it. I think it'd be a very interesting read.
Oh, well, thanks. I'd be honored to have you read it. And
But
I
you gotta
believe that
sign
you
it.
definitely have a book. Okay, I will. Promise.
It's inspiring because I feel like at some point I know there's a book in me, but I don't know. I guess I'm still living it, trying to wrap my mind around it.
Yeah, I hear
But that was actually going to be one of my next questions, but I feel like you already answered it about just where you draw inspiration from.
Mostly my own life and the people around me and my relationships. They're really inspiring for me. I learned so much from my friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships. There's so much learning, I think, to be had there and growth to be had if we're willing to do the work and to learn from others and be inspired by them. And I'm very fascinated by psychology and philosophy. I'm fascinated by what makes people tick, what makes me tick, what makes myself and others behave the way that we do. That's extremely fascinating to me, and I draw a lot of inspiration from that and different philosophers and psychologists and books that I read. But I haven't been reading as much over the last handful of months. I just moved into a new home. It's kind of echoey in my office because it's pretty empty still. So I'm in this period of more doing and less being able to just like be and read and write. And so I'm a little out of sorts with that right now. But
is there a single piece of advice that stood out to you over the years as being like really kind of pivotal in your life? Something someone said to you?
I mean, there have been so many things that people have said to me throughout my life that stick with me, especially I feel like sayings from my mother. But I think right now what's sticking out most is the present, which I'm trying to focus on more, the present. And something that someone said to me recently in relation to meeting my full potential and doing what I really am capable of doing. And he said, don't do it for me, do it for yourself. And it probably is a little bit confusing taken out of context, but I feel like it comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, Maharishi's quote about love is directed by you, to you, for you. I think that connects to what this person was saying recently, that when we're trying to grow into the best version of ourselves and become who we are and who we know we're capable of becoming, I think it's really important that we, especially for people who have a tendency to extend themselves too far for others, that we remember to take care of ourselves and to look out for ourselves. And I know that for me, that's a place where I fall short, that I can extend and extend and extend for others. And I love making other people happy. And sometimes that can come at a detriment to myself and a sacrifice of my own needs. And when he said, do it for me, do it for yourself, it was in relation to some things like a little bit different to what I just expressed, but it really hit home for me because it reminded me that I am here for me and my growth. Like, my life is for me and my growth and my evolution. It might seem selfish. It is for ourselves. It really is all for us. And when we do that for ourselves, we naturally do it for others. When we do things for ourselves that help us to grow and bring us joy and make us become the greatest expression of who we are, that naturally encourages others to do the same and ultimately makes the world a better place. And also doing that within the idea of boundaries and how boundaries are so important for ourselves and for having boundaries with others too. I feel like that's one place that the spiritual movements that talk about love being just like what we're made of and who we are can be misleading because it makes it seem like it's effortless or it should always be easy. But in my experience, love, and through my research and what I've uncovered through my research, love isn't always rosy and easy and happy. It comes with a lot of difficulty and challenges. And I think what really is the test of our ability to love is to see those challenges through and to do the work when it's not easy. Like you were talking about your experience with your friend and the love that you have for him. And because you love him so much, you're going to do the work, right? Like upon reflection, of course, we have experiences in the heat of the moment where it can be, like you said, compelling to just be like, fuck that guy. But then when we sit and we reflect and we get out of, that kind of like fight or flight mode, we can come back to our senses and be more rational and be like, no, but I actually really care about this person and I'm going to put in the work to make it work. And I think that we need to do that more for everybody, not even just the people that we love because they're a childhood friend, but we love because they're our brother and sister on this planet that we live on with them, and we're stuck with everybody. And that's what I would leave people with, is just to have the courage to do the work, to be a kind, good person, to treat everybody with respect and care, and to have boundaries within that, but also to understand that boundaries can be set in a way that is also loving. And when we set boundaries, we actually have the capacity to be more loving. And I think boundaries are really good teachers for other people too. So
it just reminds me of humility. Humility is a great ingredient. Expressing one's vulnerability and being like, you know what, I don't always have it together, we're these fallible human creatures with all kinds of complex emotions, but ultimately, like, it's a mess. It was a mess. Still love you. Anyway, this has just been such a terrific talk with you, Samantha. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Appreciate your insights. I think you're awesome. You're doing great work.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for ending on the note that you did about humility, because that's something that I definitely didn't mention. And I also agree is so incredibly important. And cheers to you for your humility and being such a beautiful person and your willingness to grow. And thank you for having me on this podcast. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. I feel like we should mention too that at one point you started a podcast.
That was a podcast mini series that I did with my friend Aaron Steinberg, who you know too. Luke.
Shout out.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron, we love you. And that was we might do another series at some point, which would be fun. But yeah, that's called Millennials Search for Meaning. And Aaron and I are both obsessed with the idea of meaning and living a meaningful life. And that podcast explores that concept and what it means for millennials to live a meaningful life. Yeah, so people can check that out. But most of my work and when I do like publish stuff about love right now, it's just on Instagram under Love by ST. And then I also have a website that has not been updated in ages called justchooselove.com, which has some videos from the love summits that I did and some more information there if people want to check it out.
Awesome. Thanks for, again, being on the podcast. Finish that book. I think you got to come back on the show and we'll discuss it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Luke.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for listening, you guys. We'll see you next time.